when wildlife photographer Trevor Nash stumbled upon a weathered Canon 5D camera wedged between rocks on a remote ridgeline in British Columbia's Spatsizi Plateau wilderness on June 14, 2013, he assumed it had been abandoned by a careless hiker. The camera's memory card, still functional despite 8 years of exposure to the elements, contained 247 photographs that would lead investigators to one of the most disturbing missing persons cases in Canadian history. The final 43 images showed something that seemed impossible. A man with wild, matted hair and beard, emaciated beyond recognition, holding handwritten signs in front of a crude stone wall. The signs read, Day 2, 147. They call this redemption. Michael is gone. They took him to the renewal. I heard him screaming for 3 hours. The man in the photographs was later identified as Dylan Mercer, a 38-year-old hunting guide from Bozeman, Montana, who had vanished without a trace in October 2005 while leading a client on a guided elk hunt in the remote mountains of northern British Columbia. His reappearance would expose the isolated survivalist cult that had operated undetected in the Canadian wilderness for over 2 decades, claiming victims from both sides of the border. Dylan Robert Mercer was not a novice outdoorsman seeking adventure beyond his abilities. Born on March 22, 1967 in Helena, Montana, Dylan grew up in a family of professional hunting guides and outfitters who had operated in the Rocky Mountain region for 3 generations. By age 38, Dylan had spent more than 20 years working as a licensed hunting guide and wilderness survival instructor, leading expeditions throughout Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and British Columbia. He held certifications in wilderness first aid, search and rescue techniques, and wildlife management, and had completed advanced survival training with the National Outdoor Leadership School in 1990. Dylan's reputation in the hunting guide community was impeccable. Clients consistently praised his knowledge of wilderness areas, his ability to track game across difficult terrain, and his unwavering commitment to safety protocols. He had successfully guided over 200 hunting expeditions without a single serious incident. His business, Mercer Mountain Outfitters, operated out of Bozeman and specialized in remote backcountry hunts in the most challenging terrain of the Northern Rockies. In August 2005, Dylan was contacted by Michael Harrison, a 44-year-old investment banker from Chicago, Illinois, who wanted to book a guided elk hunt in British Columbia for October. Harrison, an experienced hunter who had completed numerous guided hunts throughout North America, specifically requested an expedition into extremely remote wilderness areas where hunting pressure was minimal and opportunities for trophy-class bulls were high. Dylan proposed a location he had scouted the previous year, the Spatsizi Plateau wilderness in northern British Columbia, approximately 150 miles northwest of Fort St. James. The region, characterized by vast expanses of subalpine meadows, dense spruce forests, and rugged mountain peaks, was among the most isolated wilderness areas in North America, accessible only by floatplane or multi-day horseback trek. Dylan had obtained all necessary permits from British Columbia Parks and the Provincial Wildlife Ministry for a 12-day hunting expedition scheduled from October 10 through October 22, 2005. The expedition plan, filed with both Canadian authorities and Dylan's business partner in Montana, called for a floatplane insertion to a remote lake, establishment of a spike camp, and daily hunts in the surrounding terrain. Dylan's emergency contact was his wife, Sarah Mercer, and Michael Harrison's was his wife, Jennifer Harrison of Evanston, Illinois. Both men carried substantial life insurance policies, a standard requirement for Dylan's guide service given the inherent risks of wilderness hunting. On October 10, 2005 at 7:30 a.m., bush pilot Robert Anderson departed from the Fort St. James airstrip in his de Havilland Beaver floatplane with Dylan Mercer and Michael Harrison aboard. Anderson, a 28-year veteran of wilderness flying with over 12,000 logged flight hours, had worked with Dylan on previous expeditions and knew the Spatsizi region well. The flight log, preserved in Transport Canada records, shows the aircraft landed at 9:15 a.m. on an unnamed lake at coordinates 58-1742 N 127-4815 W, elevation 4,600 feet. Anderson's statement to investigators given weeks later described the drop-off as routine. Weather conditions were excellent, with clear skies and light winds. Dillon and Harrison unloaded approximately 300 pounds of equipment and supplies: 2 tents, sleeping bags, cooking gear, food provisions for 14 days, hunting rifles, ammunition, and professional photography equipment, including Dillon's Canon 5D camera with multiple lenses. Anderson specifically remembered Dillon reviewing the pickup plan: return to the same lake on October 22nd at 10 a.m. If weather prevented pickup, Dillon would activate his satellite emergency beacon and wait for the next available clear day. Dillon carried a handheld satellite communicator capable of sending text messages, though coverage in the region was limited to high-elevation ridgelines and open areas. Anderson departed at 10:20 a.m., circled once over the lake as Dillon and Harrison waved from shore, and flew back to Fort St. James. On October 12, 2005 at 2:45 p.m., Dillon sent a satellite text message to his wife Sarah from a ridgeline approximately 3 miles from the lake. The message read, "Day 2 excellent, weather holding. Spotted trophy class bull 2 km of camp. Moving camp closer tomorrow. We'll check in Oct 15. Love you." Sarah Mercer, accustomed to limited communication during her husband's expeditions, noted nothing unusual about the message's content or timing. When the scheduled October 15th check-in did not occur, Sarah attempted to send a message to Dillon's satellite device at 4 p.m. that day. The device showed the message as delivered, but received no response. By October 18th, when multiple attempts to contact Dillon had failed and no messages had been received for 6 days, Sarah Mercer contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Detachment in Fort St. James to report concern about her missing husband. When Dillon and Harrison failed to appear at the scheduled pickup location on October 22nd, bush pilot Robert Anderson circled the lake for 30 minutes, scanning the shoreline and nearby clearings with binoculars. Seeing no sign of the hunters or any signal fires, Anderson flew a wider search pattern, checking adjacent lakes and meadows where the men might have relocated their camp. Finding nothing, Anderson returned to Fort St. James and immediately reported the situation to the RCMP at 11:45 a.m. The search and rescue operation began on October 23, 2005 at 8 m, coordinated by the RCMP Fort St. James Detachment and involving the British Columbia Search and Rescue Association. The initial team consisted of 12 SR volunteers, 4 RCMP officers, and 2 helicopter crews from Prince George. Weather conditions had deteriorated significantly since October 22nd, with heavy rain and low clouds limiting aerial search operations. Ground teams were inserted by helicopter to the lake on October 24th when weather briefly cleared. At the shoreline, searchers found Dillon's base camp exactly where Anderson had dropped them off 2 weeks earlier. 2 tents remained erected, though one had partially collapsed under accumulating rain. Inside the tents, investigators found sleeping bags, personal items, clothing, toiletries, and most of the food supplies. Michael Harrison's hunting rifle, a Remington 700 in the .300 Winchester Magnum, leaned against a tree, unloaded with ammunition stored in its case. Dillon's rifle, a custom .338 Winchester Magnum, was missing. Most significantly, Dillon's satellite communicator was found inside his tent, fully functional with battery charge remaining. His GPS unit sat beside it, showing a track log of movements from October 10th through October 13th, then no further data. Both men's wallets containing identification, credit cards, and cash were present. Missing from the camp were both men, their hunting packs, some cold-weather clothing, Dillon's camera, binoculars, a portion of the ammunition, and basic survival gear including fire-starting equipment and water purification tablets. The presence of the satellite communicator and GPS troubled investigators immediately. Dillon, an experienced guide who understood wilderness communication protocols, would never voluntarily leave such critical safety equipment at camp while venturing into the backcountry. On October 25th, helicopter teams conducted extensive aerial searches covering a 30-mile radius from the base camp, using thermal imaging to detect heat signatures and scanning clearings and ridgelines for signals or signs of human presence. Ground teams began systematic searches along obvious routes the hunters might have taken, following game trails, checking creek drainages, and examining areas with known elk populations. K-9 units from Prince George tracked human scent trails leading north from the camp, but heavy rain over the preceding days had severely degraded scent markers. Over the following 16 days, the search expanded to involve over 60 personnel, including specialized wilderness rescue teams, indigenous trackers from the nearby Gitsan First Nation who possessed intimate knowledge of the terrain, and volunteer hunters familiar with the region. Weather remained problematic, with persistent rain and early snow limiting visibility and making ground searches treacherous. On November 3rd, search teams discovered a significant find approximately 8 miles northeast of the base camp. At an elevation of 5,400 feet in a small clearing surrounded by dense spruce forest, investigators found evidence of a temporary camp, a fire ring containing cold ashes, several cut spruce boughs arranged as bedding and drag marks in the soil, suggesting something heavy had been moved through the area. Forensic analysis of the ashes determined the fire had been built approximately 2 to 3 weeks earlier, consistent with the timeline of Dylan and Harrison's presence in the area. Most disturbing was what appeared to be dried blood on several of the spruce boughs, later confirmed through DNA analysis to belong to Michael Harrison. The quantity and distribution pattern suggested a significant injury, though not necessarily a fatal wound. Scattered around the clearing were several items: a section of paracord cut into multiple pieces, a hunting knife sheath without the knife, and what appeared to be part of a bootlace. K-9 units detected human scent but could not establish a clear directional trail from the clearing. Searchers combed the surrounding area for 2 days, finding no additional evidence or indication of which direction the hunters had traveled from this location. By November 10, 2005, after 19 days of intensive searching covering over 250 square miles of rugged wilderness, the official search was suspended due to heavy snow and dangerous conditions. RCMP Corporal David Thompson, who coordinated the search operation, held a press conference stating that despite extraordinary efforts, no trace of Dylan Mercer or Michael Harrison had been found beyond the temporary camp, and minimal evidence suggesting they had suffered some kind of incident. The official report listed several possible scenarios: a hunting accident resulting in injury and subsequent death from exposure, a bear attack, a fall in treacherous terrain, or disorientation leading to hypothermia as weather deteriorated. Sarah Mercer and Jennifer Harrison arrived in Fort St. James in early November, desperate for answers. Both families hired private investigator Marcus Webb, a former RCMP officer specializing in wilderness missing persons cases. Webb spent 3 weeks examining the search area, interviewing all personnel involved, and exploring theories that official searchers might have overlooked. His December 2005 report concluded, "The evidence pattern is inconsistent with typical wilderness accidents, the organized state of the base camp, the abandonment of critical communication equipment, the blood evidence at the temporary camp, and the complete absence of any further trace suggests an event beyond natural causes." Without additional evidence, the fate of Dylan Mercer and Michael Harrison remains undetermined. In March 2006, after 5 months with no new developments, and with winter conditions making further searches impossible, the British Columbia Coroner's Service declared Dylan Mercer and Michael Harrison legally deceased, with date of death listed as October 13, 2005, and manner of death as presumed accidental death in wilderness environment. The declaration allowed families to settle estates and process insurance claims, though both families contested the findings, arguing insufficient evidence supported the accident conclusion. Sarah Mercer received a life insurance payment of $500,000 in June 2006. Jennifer Harrison received $750,000 in August 2006. The Mercer family established a wilderness safety scholarship at Montana State University in Dylan's name. The Harrison family donated funds to search and rescue organizations in British Columbia. Both families, devastated by the lack of closure and bodies to bury, held memorial services for their loved ones in fall 2006. The case gradually faded from public attention over the following years. Between 2006 and 2013, the Spatsizi Plateau Wilderness region recorded 8 additional search and rescue incidents. though all were resolved with hikers or hunters found alive, or in 2 cases bodies recovered from obvious accidents. In September 2008, a hunting guide reported seeing what he described as primitive structures in a remote valley approximately 15 miles from where Dylan and Harrison had vanished. When RCMP investigated, they found only natural rock formations and weathered deadfall that could be mistaken for constructed shelters. The guide's report was filed, but not actively pursued. In 2010, on the 5th anniversary of the disappearance, a small group of Dylan's fellow hunting guides organized a memorial flight over the search area, scattering flowers over the unnamed lake where he was last seen. By June 2013, the case existed only in RCMP archives and in the memories of those who had known Dylan Mercer and Michael Harrison. On June 14, 2013, at 11:30 a.m., wildlife photographer Trevor Nash was hiking alone on a ridgeline approximately 12 miles northeast of the lake, where Dylan and Harrison had been dropped in 2005. Nash, a 34-year-old professional photographer from Vancouver, was documenting grizzly bear populations in the Spatsizi region for a conservation organization. While traversing a rocky slope at elevation 6,200 feet, Nash noticed something unusual wedged between 2 boulders, a black object covered in lichen and weathering that, upon closer inspection, appeared to be a camera. Nash carefully extracted what proved to be a Canon 5D digital camera in remarkably intact condition, considering its exposure to 8 years of weather. The camera body showed extensive wear, with scratches and discoloration, but the weather sealing had protected the internal components from moisture damage. Most significantly, the camera's compact flash memory card remained securely in place. Nash, understanding the potential significance of the discovery, photographed the location where he found the camera, documented its condition, and carefully placed it in a waterproof bag in his pack. He noted the GPS coordinates, 50 D Gaud 94 to 16 N, 127 MSC 41 to 3 W, approximately 12.3 miles from the lake where Dylan Mercer's base camp had been found 8 years earlier. Upon returning to Fort St. James 3 days later, Nash reported his find to the RCMP detachment on June 17, 2013. Corporal Jennifer Walsh, who had not been involved in the original 2005 search, initially treated the camera as lost property and began standard procedures to identify the owner. On June 18th, an RCMP evidence technician successfully downloaded 247 images from the camera's memory card. The first 204 images were typical hunting expedition photographs, wilderness landscapes, wildlife, including elk, and grizzly bears, camp scenes, and portraits of 2 men in hunting gear who appeared to be enjoying their trip. The metadata confirmed these images were captured between October 10th and October 13th, 2005. Image 205 marked a dramatic shift. Dated October 14th, 2005, it showed a poorly lit interior space with stone walls, the image slightly blurred, but clearly depicting a confined area unlike the outdoor scenes in previous photos. Images 206 through 247, spanning dates from October 2005 through February 2007, showed progressively more disturbing content. Many images were dark or poorly composed, suggesting they had been taken in secret or under difficult conditions. Several showed crude structures, wooden poles lashed together, stone walls, rough-hewn timber beams. The most haunting images, numbered 238 through 247, showed a man barely recognizable as human, skeletal thin with wild matted hair reaching past his shoulders, a long unkempt beard, wearing what appeared to be animal hides crudely stitched together. The man held handwritten signs made on torn paper or bark, each sign containing messages. Image 238. Day 974. They watch always. Michael tried to run. They brought him back bleeding. Image 239. Day 156. The elder says we are being purified. I don't know what that means anymore. Image 240. Day 123. They took Michael this morning. He was crying. They said it was time for his renewal. Image 241. Day 524. I heard Michael screaming. It lasted 3 hours. They won't let me see him. Image 242. Day 525. The elder showed me Michael's bones, said his spirit is free now, said I'm next if I don't accept the truth. Image 243. Day 1, 8:47. I pretend to believe. It's the only way to survive. I don't remember who I was. Image 244. Day 2, 2:03. They let me keep the camera. Think I'm documenting their holy work, taking pictures when they don't watch. Image 245. Day 2, 490. 3 more taken this year. Heard their screams too. How many bones are in that room? Image 246. Day 2 and 6:54. If anyone finds this, they're in the caves below Black Tusk Mountain. GPS 582347N 1273918W. Tell Sarah I tried. Image 247. Day 2047. I'm going to try to run. I'll hide the camera first. If I don't make it, don't forget us. The final image was dated February 11, 2007. Corporal Walsh immediately escalated the case to RCMP Major Crimes. By June 19, 2013, a joint task force had been established, including RCMP Major Crimes investigators, the British Columbia Coroner's Service, and FBI liaison officers, given that 2 American citizens were involved. Forensic analysis of the photographs confirmed they had been taken with the camera found on the ridgeline. Metadata was intact and could not have been easily falsified. The man in the later photographs was submitted to facial recognition specialists who, despite the subject's altered appearance, confirmed with 87% probability that he was Dylan Mercer based on comparison with known photographs. Handwriting analysis of the signs matched samples of Dylan Mercer's writing provided by his family. The GPS coordinates in image 246 became the focal point of the investigation. The location specified, described as below Black Tusk Mountain, referred to a prominent peak in the Spatsizi region, approximately 14 miles from where the camera was found and 18 miles from Dylan's original base camp. On June 22, 2013, a reconnaissance team including RCMP tactical officers, search and rescue specialists, and a forensic anthropologist flew to the area by helicopter. The coordinates led to a steep-walled valley surrounded by dense forest, with extensive limestone cliff faces containing numerous cave openings. At 2:40 p.m., the team located the entrance to a cave system that had been modified by human hands. The entrance, approximately 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, had been partially concealed by carefully arranged brush and fallen logs that appeared to blend naturally with the surrounding forest. Inside, the cave opened into a larger chamber, approximately 30 feet across. The interior showed unmistakable signs of long-term human habitation. Fire pits with ash and charcoal sleeping platforms constructed from cut log storage areas, carved into the rock walls, and extensive modifications including a carved water channel that diverted groundwater through the chamber. Torches made from pitch-soaked wood were mounted in wall niches. The walls were covered with painted symbols and text, geometric patterns, crude drawings of human figures, and lengthy written passages describing philosophical and religious concepts centered on themes of purification, sacrifice, and spiritual transformation. The text was written in English but used idiosyncratic capitalization and spelling, suggesting either mental deterioration or deliberate stylistic choice by the author. One wall featured what appeared to be a manifesto titled "The Doctrine of Renewal Through Sacrifice," running to over 2,000 words, and describing a belief system that combined distorted Christianity, environmental extremism, and survivalist ideology. The core teaching held that modern civilization had corrupted humanity's spirit, and that only through complete isolation, extreme physical hardship, and ritual sacrifice could individuals be spiritually renewed and made worthy of a coming apocalypse that would destroy the corrupted world. Following a narrow passage deeper into the cave system, investigators discovered 3 additional chambers. The second chamber appeared to be a workshop containing crude tools, stone hammers, bone knives, wooden implements, and materials for making rope from plant fibers. Hanging from wooden racks were garments made from tanned deer and moose hides. The third chamber was designated as sleeping quarters, with 6 wooden platforms covered with animal hides and dried grass. Personal items were scattered throughout: homemade sandals, carved wooden bowls, and small personal effects that appeared to have belonged to different individuals over many years. The fourth chamber, accessed through a particularly narrow passage that required crawling, was what Dylan's photograph had called that room, The chamber was approximately 15 feet square with a low ceiling. In the center stood a stone altar constructed from stacked rocks. Around the altar, arranged in deliberate patterns, were human skeletal remains. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Rachel Morrison, who was part of the search team, conducted a preliminary field examination and determined there were remains of at least 6 individuals, possibly more, in various states of decomposition and skeletal preservation. One complete skeleton lay on the stone altar itself, positioned on its back with arms crossed over the chest. The bones showed evidence of burning, particularly the rib cage and skull, consistent with exposure to intense heat. Preliminary assessment suggested this individual had died relatively recently compared to other remains in the chamber, possibly within the past 5 to 7 years. Around the walls of the chamber were carved niches, each containing a human skull. Dr. Morrison counted 11 skulls, all showing signs of trauma, fractures, cut marks, or burning. The immediate area was secured as a crime scene. Over the following 3 days, forensic teams carefully documented and removed all human remains from the cave system. The skeletal remains were transported to the BC Coroner's Service Laboratory in Vancouver for comprehensive analysis. The initial investigation of the cave also yielded crucial documents. Several journals written in the same hand as the wall text, stored in waterproof containers. The journals, dating from 1989 through 2012, belonged to an individual who identified himself as Jeremiah Stone, originally from Spokane, Washington. Stone's writings described his transformation from a disillusioned software engineer to the leader of what he called the Remnant, a group dedicated to preparing for civilization's collapse. He described establishing the cave compound in 1991 after years of solitary survival in the wilderness, gradually recruiting followers, and developing the renewal ceremony, a ritual in which group members who failed to achieve sufficient spiritual purification were subjected to prolonged torture, culminating in death by burning. Their bones preserved as sacred anchors that would ensure the group's survival during the coming apocalypse. The journals documented at least 14 individuals brought to the cave compound over 23 years. Some were willing recruits who sought Stone's teachings. Others, including Dylan Mercer and Michael Harrison, were opportunities provided by Providence, captured when they wandered into areas the group monitored. An entry from October 15, 2005, described the capture of 2 hunters from the corrupted South who had been tracked for 3 days before being ambushed at their temporary camp. Stone wrote, "The younger one resisted violently. We subdued him with necessary force. The older one, the guide, understood more quickly that resistance was futile. We brought them to the sanctuary. The younger one's spirit remains too attached to the old world. He will likely require renewal. The guide shows more promise." Subsequent entries documented Michael Harrison's fate. Stone described Harrison's multiple escape attempts, his refusal to participate in rituals, and his continued defiance despite physical punishments. In March 2007, Stone wrote, "Michael's renewal was completed today. His screams lasted 3 hours and 17 minutes. His spirit fought hard but ultimately submitted to purification. His bones will strengthen our foundation." The guide watched. He understands now what awaits those who resist. About Dylan Mercer, Stone's entries showed conflicted feelings. Dylan appeared to have adopted a strategy of outward compliance, participating in rituals, working on camp tasks, and gradually earning limited trust within the group. Stone wrote in August 2007, "The guide has accepted his purpose. He documents our work with his camera, capturing the beauty of our isolation. He speaks the words of renewal, though I sense his heart remains divided. He is useful and does not require the same watching as others." The final journal entry, dated November 2012, stated, "Signs of outside presence. Helicopter overhead. The guide has become dangerous, asking too many questions. The remnant must scatter. We will abandon this sanctuary and reunite at the northern refuge when the danger passes. The guide will be left. If he reveals our location, it matters not. We will be beyond reach." The investigation into the skeletal remains proceeded through summer 2013. DNA analysis confirmed that one set of remains belonged to Michael Harrison, identified through comparison with DNA samples from his family. The condition of his skeletal remains, particularly burning patterns on the bones, was consistent with the renewal ceremony described in Stone's journals and Dylan's photographs. Medical examination estimated time of death as approximately March 2007, matching the journal entry. Among the other remains, investigators identified 3 additional individuals: Robert Palmer, a 41-year-old hiker from Oregon, who had been reported missing in the Spatsizi region in 1998, Susan Walker, a 29-year-old wilderness guide from Alberta, who vanished in 2003, and James Cooper, a 35-year-old hunter from Montana, who disappeared in 2009. All 3 cases had been investigated separately and closed as presumed accidental deaths in wilderness settings. 4 sets of remains could not be identified despite extensive efforts, suggesting victims who had never been reported missing or whose disappearances were not connected to the Spatsizi region. Notably absent from the cave were any remains that matched Dylan Mercer's description. The investigation turned to finding Dylan himself, who had presumably been alive when he took the final photograph in February 2007 and might have survived his escape attempt. On June 28, 2013, a systematic search began in areas surrounding the cave complex, focusing on routes Dylan might have taken if he had successfully fled. Search teams examined the ridgeline where his camera had been found, theorizing he might have hidden it there deliberately before continuing his escape. On July 3, 2013, searchers made a grim discovery. Approximately 4 miles northeast of the cave complex, in a steep ravine choked with deadfall and dense vegetation, they found partial skeletal remains that had been scattered by wildlife. Forensic examination and DNA analysis confirmed these were the remains of Dylan Mercer. The condition of the skeleton suggested he had died sometime in early 2007, likely within days or weeks of taking his final photographs. The cause of death could not be determined definitively due to the condition of the remains, but the location in a remote, treacherous ravine suggested Dylan may have fallen while attempting to navigate difficult terrain during his escape attempt. His death appeared to be from natural causes related to the fall and subsequent exposure rather than from violence. The discovery provided tragic closure for Sarah Mercer, who received the news at her home in Bozeman. She told investigators, "At least now I know what happened to him. He didn't give up. He tried to survive, tried to escape, tried to leave evidence so others could be saved. That's who Dylan was." The investigation into Jeremiah Stone and other members of the remnant intensified through summer 2013. FBI agents joined RCMP investigators in attempting to track down the cult members who had scattered when the cave was abandoned. Stone, born Jeffrey Allen Steinberg in Spokane, Washington in 1954, had a documented history that made his descent into extremism tragically predictable. Employment records showed he had worked as a software engineer in Seattle during the 1980s before suffering a psychological breakdown in 1988 following a divorce and job loss. Friends from that period described him as increasingly paranoid, obsessed with apocalyptic scenarios and convinced that modern society was spiritually bankrupt. He disappeared in 1989, leaving behind unpaid debts and concerned family members who reported him missing but never saw him again. Stone's transformation from troubled engineer to cult leader had occurred entirely in the wilderness, his journals documenting years of solitary survival before gradually attracting followers who were drawn to his charismatic teachings and promises of spiritual renewal. Investigators identified 9 possible cult members based on Stone's journals and items found in the cave. Some appeared to have been with the group for decades, while others had joined more recently. Descriptions were limited, as Stone rarely used real names in his writings, referring to members by titles like First Disciple, The Watcher, or Keeper of the Fire. Despite extensive searching, distributing wanted notices, and monitoring wilderness areas throughout British Columbia, Alberta, and the Yukon Territory, no members of the remnant were located. The prevailing theory was that they had dispersed individually or in small groups, possibly leaving Canada entirely or relocating to even more remote areas of the vast northern wilderness. Some investigators believe Stone himself might have died in the wilderness, either from natural causes or suicide, though this could not be confirmed. On September 12, 2013, RCMP held a press conference announcing the findings of the investigation. Inspector David Wright stated, "We have confirmed that Dylan Mercer and Michael Harrison were kidnapped and held captive by an isolated cult operating in the Spatsizi wilderness for approximately 18 months before Mr. Harrison was murdered and Mr. Mercer died attempting to escape. We have identified multiple other victims of this group. An arrest warrant has been issued for Jeffrey Allen Steinberg, also known as Jeremiah Stone, for multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and unlawful confinement. This investigation remains active and ongoing." The photographs from Dylan's camera were not released to the public in full due to their disturbing content and out of respect for the victims' families. Selected images were shown to media in redacted form to illustrate the conditions Dylan had documented. The case attracted international attention given its scope and the length of time the cult had operated undetected. Sarah Mercer received Dylan's remains in October 2013 and arranged for cremation. A memorial service attended by over 300 people was held in Bozeman, with many of Dylan's fellow guides speaking about his professionalism, his love of wilderness, and his dedication to his work. Sarah told attendees, "Dylan spent the last years of his life in unimaginable conditions, but he never stopped fighting. He documented what was happening to him and others. He tried to escape. He left clues so that even if he didn't survive, others might be saved. He died trying to do what he always did, guide people out of danger." Jennifer Harrison, who had remarried in 2009 believing her first husband had died in a hunting accident, received Michael's remains in November 2013. She held a private burial service in Illinois, telling reporters, "I lived for 8 years thinking Michael died in an accident. Knowing the truth is somehow both worse and better. Worse because of what he suffered. Better because now I know he didn't just make a mistake. He was taken from me by evil people. That's not his fault." The British Columbia government faced criticism about how the cult had operated undetected for over 2 decades in a provincial park. A formal review in December 2013 found that the vastness of the Spatsizi region, the limited number of conservation officers and rangers, and the extremely remote nature of the cave location had allowed the group to remain hidden. New protocols were implemented requiring more frequent aerial surveys of remote areas, mandatory GPS tracking for all guided hunting and hiking expeditions, and increased communication requirements for commercial operations in wilderness areas. The RCMP established a dedicated task force to monitor extremist groups operating in remote regions, with particular attention to survivalist and doomsday cults that might pose risks to hikers and hunters. 4 other missing persons cases in British Columbia, Alberta, and the Yukon Territory, dating from 1994 through 2011, were reopened and investigated for possible connections to the remnant. While no definitive links were established, the pattern of disappearances in remote areas suggested the cult might have operated more widely than previously believed. As of late 2013, Jeffrey Allen Steinberg remained at large, subject to an international arrest warrant. He would be 59 years old, though investigators believed his appearance had likely been dramatically altered by decades of wilderness living. None of the other remnant members had been identified or located. The case remained officially open, though active search operations were scaled back as months passed with no new leads. The cave complex was permanently sealed in January 2014 to prevent unauthorized access and to preserve it as a crime scene should additional evidence be needed. A small plaque was placed near the trail leading to the area, reading, "In memory of those who lost their lives in these mountains, Dylan Mercer, Michael Harrison, and others. May they be remembered, and may this wilderness find peace." The photographs Dylan Mercer took during his captivity were preserved as evidence and studied by psychologists and cult experts, seeking to understand the psychological mechanisms that allowed him to survive as long as he did in such conditions. Dr. Sharon Williams, a forensic psychologist who reviewed the images and journals, noted, "Dylan's strategy of outward compliance while maintaining internal resistance and his decision to document the cult's activities were sophisticated survival mechanisms. The photographs show someone maintaining purpose and hope even in extreme circumstances. That he continued taking images right up until his escape attempt suggests he never fully gave up." The 4 unidentified victims found in the cave remain nameless as of early 2014. Their remains were buried in the Fort St. James Municipal Cemetery under markers reading "Unknown victim of the remnant cult, may you find peace." DNA samples were preserved in case future missing persons reports provided matches for identification. The wilderness of northern British Columbia remains as vast and remote as ever. The Spatsizi Plateau, covering over 2,700 square miles of rugged terrain, contains countless valleys, caves, and hidden areas that could shelter those who wish to disappear. For hunters and hikers who venture into these remote regions, the case serves as a disturbing reminder that the greatest dangers are not always bears, weather, or terrain. Sometimes the threat comes from other humans who have rejected society so completely that they view isolated travelers not as fellow people, but as opportunities for recruitment, exploitation, or worse. Dylan Mercer's photographs, taken secretly over 18 months of captivity and carefully hidden where they would eventually be found, ensured that his story and Michael Harrison's fate would not remain buried forever. Those images, haunting in their progression from professional hunting trip documentation to desperate messages from a man fighting to maintain his identity and sanity, stand as testimony to human resilience and to the costs of survival. The remnant cult's operation over 23 years, claiming at least 11 confirmed victims, with possibly more never identified, exposed troubling questions about how effectively such remote areas can be monitored and how many other isolated extremist groups might exist in the vast wilderness regions of North America. Sarah Mercer continues to live in Bozeman, though she has not returned to hunting guiding work. She became an advocate for improved wilderness safety protocols and works with organizations supporting families of missing persons. In interviews, she speaks of her husband not as a victim, but as someone who fought until the end and left behind evidence that saved others from being forgotten. The camera that Trevor Nash found on that ridgeline in June 2013, weathered but functional, is preserved in RCMP evidence storage. The 247 images it contained told a story that seemed impossible, an experienced hunting guide transformed into a captive, documented over 847 days through photographs that serve as both memorial and warning. Jeffrey Allen Steinberg, if still alive, would be in his 60s now. Possibly still in the wilderness he claimed was the only pure place left in a corrupted world, possibly dead from exposure or illness, possibly living under a new identity and civilization. The investigation continues, hope for justice persists, but the wilderness keeps its secrets, and somewhere in that vast northern expanse there may be other caves, other hidden sanctuaries, other stories of suffering that have not yet been discovered and may never be told. Dylan Mercer made sure his story would be known, but how many others vanished into that wilderness without cameras, without leaving evidence, without anyone knowing what really happened to them? That question haunts investigators still, and it has no answer.